On the night of April 26, 1950, Frank Sinatra walked onto the stage of the Copacabana Club in New York City, one of the most coveted performance venues in the country, a room that could have reignited a career that had been quietly bleeding out for the better part of 2 years. He opened his mouth to sing. What came out was almost nothing. His vocal cords had hemorrhaged, silenced mid-performance by the accumulated damage of years of overwork, emotional chaos, and a romantic obsession that had consumed everything else in his life. He canceled the final 5 nights of the engagement and walked off stage into what would become the worst period of his professional life. The decision that had led him to that moment was not made that night at the Copacabana. It had been made the previous year, when he looked at a photograph of Ava Gardner and told the people around him, with the absolute unmovable certainty of a man who had never been particularly interested in the difference between wanting something and deserving it, that he was going to marry that woman. Everything that followed from that decision, the career collapse, the voice gone, the money gone, the record deal gone, the agency gone, the television show gone, the dignity largely gone, was the consequence of one man's refusal to understand that you cannot build a life around a fire that burns everything it touches. Francis Albert Sinatra was born on December 12, 1915, in Hoboken, New Jersey, the only child of Italian immigrants Martin and Natalie Sinatra. His mother, Dolly, was a force of nature, a ward boss in local Democratic politics, a woman who knew how to get things done, and who raised her son with the understanding that the world was navigable if you were willing to push hard enough and ask for what you wanted with sufficient conviction. His father was quieter and steadier, a boxer turned fireman, and the combination of the two produced a son who had his mother's aggression and his father's instinct for the room. Sinatra began singing professionally in his late teens, working with local groups and eventually attracting the attention of bandleader Harry James in 1939. He moved to Tommy Dorsey's band the following year, and it was there that he developed the specific qualities that would define his career. A breath control borrowed directly from watching Dorsey's trombone playing, the ability to sustain a phrase beyond what any other singer of the era could manage, and a capacity for emotional specificity that made every lyric feel like a private confession. By 1942, when he left Dorsey to go solo, the Bobby Soxers, the teenage girls who had been following him to every performance, had established a level of devoted mass hysteria around him that the music industry had never quite seen before. He played the Paramount Theater in New York on New Year's Eve 1942, and the crowd outside was so large that the police department had to send additional units. He was 26 years old and already one of the most famous people in the country. He was also already married. He had wed Nancy Barbato in 1939, and she had given him 3 children, Nancy Jr., Frank Jr., and Tina, while he was becoming the most adored male vocalist in America. The marriage was functional and stable and produced a family he would, by most accounts, love sincerely for the rest of his life. It was also not sufficient to contain a man whose appetites had been growing at roughly the same rate as his fame. He had a well-documented series of affairs throughout the 1940s, with actresses, with women he met on the road, with whoever happened to be in the vicinity when the touring schedule allowed. Nancy knew. She stayed. And then, in 1943, Frank Sinatra was introduced to Ava Gardner at a dinner party, looked at one of the most extraordinary-looking human beings he had ever seen, and something in his calculation changed permanently. They did not begin their affair immediately. Gardner was already occupied with the first of what would be 3 marriages, to Mickey Rooney in 1942, to bandleader Artie Shaw in 1945, both ending quickly and badly, and Sinatra was navigating the late peak years of his first phase of fame. But by 1949, the attraction had turned into something neither of them was willing to manage from a distance. They began seeing each other openly enough that Sinatra's publicist George Evans, who had been engineering the public image of the family man from Hoboken with considerable skill for several years, warned his client in the plainest terms available that he was going to destroy himself. The public would not forgive him. The Bobby Soxers were not sophisticated consumers of celebrity scandal. They would turn. Evans was right about everything. Sinatra didn't care. What nobody in his inner circle had fully accounted for was the timing. By 1949, Sinatra's career was already showing serious structural weakness beneath the surface that the hit records and full venues had been papering over. The musical landscape was shifting. The big band era that had launched him was giving way to something louder and more aggressive that his specific gifts were not designed for. The teenage girls who had screamed for him at the Paramount in 1942 were growing up, and the record business was not interested in waiting for them to keep pace with their old idol. His Columbia Records president, Mitch Miller, was pushing him to record novelty tunes that had nothing to do with what Sinatra did well. Songs that compromised his artistic credibility and confused the audience that remained loyal to him. The affair with Gardner became the scaffolding onto which the press, the public, and the industry hung every anxiety they had about a man who seemed to be coming apart. In 1950, he lost his voice completely for several months due to vocal cord hemorrhaging, the direct result of singing as many as 100 songs per day across years of relentless performing. The Copacabana appearance in April was the most public manifestation of that damage. He canceled. The press covered the cancellation with the specific enthusiasm that attaches to the downfall of someone previously considered untouchable. His publicist George Evans died suddenly in January 1950 at 39, a loss that removed the single most effective voice in Sinatra's professional life for containing the damage he was doing to himself. Without Evans managing the narrative, the stories about Gardner, about the marriage to Nancy falling apart, about the mood swings and the tabloid incidents, accumulated without anyone able to contextualize or redirect them. Nancy filed for separation in February 1950, the same month Sinatra had asked for a divorce on Valentine's Day. The public blamed Gardner. She received letters, she later said, accusing her of being a scarlet woman and considerably worse. In 1952, the Columbia Records contract came due and was not renewed. His talent agency dropped him. His network television show was canceled. He married Gardner in November 1951, 1 week after his divorce from Nancy was finalized, and the marriage that had seemed from the outside like the grand romantic gesture of a man willing to sacrifice everything for love turned out, from the inside, to resemble something closer to two volatile people locked in a room together with no exit strategy. Gardner was the main breadwinner. Sinatra charged gifts to her account. She arranged through her studio contract for him to be given work, and she personally approached a producer to get him an audition for a role he desperately needed. The man who had been the most famous entertainer in the country 4 years earlier was being supported professionally by his wife while he fell apart in ways that were visible to everyone around them. He sent her telegrams every day from wherever he was in the world telling her he loved her and missed her, while they fought publicly in ways that ended up in newspapers and generated the kind of coverage that no amount of romantic sentiment could balance. The role Gardner pushed him toward was the part of Angelo Maggio in Fred Zinnemann's adaptation of James Jones' novel From Here to Eternity. The casting process for the film was not simple. Harry Cohn at Columbia Pictures was not convinced that a singer with a collapsed career and a tabloid reputation was the right choice for a dramatic role in one of the most anticipated films of the year. Sinatra campaigned for the part with a desperation that was, by that point, entirely genuine. He was offered a salary of $8,000, a fraction of what he had earned at his peak. He accepted immediately. He flew himself to the audition. He read for the part and left the room without knowing whether he had it. When the call came telling him he was cast, he has said he wept. From Here to Eternity was released in 1953, and Sinatra's performance as the doomed, defiant Maggio won him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. The comeback it triggered was total and permanent. Capitol Records signed him. The new albums he made in the mid-1950s are considered by most music historians to be the finest work of his career, and the man who had been playing county fairs in 1952 was headlining Las Vegas and selling out Carnegie Hall by 1955. The marriage to Gardner did not survive the comeback. They separated in 1953, and the divorce was finalized in 1957. She never remarried. He married twice more. For the rest of his life, Sinatra maintained that Gardner had been the great love of his life and simultaneously the most unmanageable relationship he had ever been inside. He described it, to his friend Tony Consiglio, as being at war with someone for the entirety of the time you were with them, a state in which the best you could hope for was an occasional truce. The decision to pursue her, to leave his family, to burn his career to the ground in the process of chasing something that was always going to be too volatile to hold. That was the worst decision of his life by almost any measure. It was also, paradoxically, the decision that saved it. because the collapse it produced was the thing that forced him, at the absolute bottom, to beg for a small role in a film he had no guarantee of getting, and to deliver a performance that rebuilt everything he had dismantled. Frank Sinatra destroyed himself over Ava Gardner, and the destruction turned out to be the making of him.